How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie is one of the most effective books in the world of human relations. If you want to improve your social intelligence, be more influential, and enhance your leadership skills, then this book should be your Bible. Even though the book was written 84 years ago, it is still applicable today and is one of the best-selling books globally. In this video, I will summarize the entire book. After watching the video, you can say you've read the book because I will cover each chapter and important information. Part 1. Fundamental Techniques in Handling People. Chapter 1. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. People do not criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong they may be. Remember that people are emotional creatures and are motivated by their ego and pride. Criticizing people almost always puts them on the defensive, and they'll find ways to rationalize their actions. For example, family members of criminals often go into denial, blaming the system instead of the person for the crimes. Criticism wounds a person's pride and sense of importance. Remember that people can hold resentments for insults that can last a lifetime. The famous test pilot Bob Hoover was flying back from an air show in San Diego when suddenly both of his engines failed. Through a skillful flight, he was able to land the plane, saving those on board. Unfortunately, the plane suffered severe damage. The reason for the engine's terrible failure was that the World War II propeller plane had been accidentally filled with jet fuel. Back at the airport, Hoover saw the mechanic who had made the mistake. The young man was crying, knowing how angry Hoover would be for the loss of his expensive plane and the danger the 3 people on board had faced. So, did Hoover shout at him? Scold him? Criticize him? Not at all. In fact, Hoover said that to demonstrate his faith that the mechanic had learned his lesson, he would like the same mechanic to service his plane the next day. The reason for Hoover's benevolence was perhaps that he knew something that the psychologist B.F. Skinner had discovered long ago. Animals rewarded for their good behavior will learn more effectively than those punished for their bad behavior. And the same goes for people. Criticizing them will not encourage them because they are not primarily motivated by reason, but by emotion. Anyone can criticize or complain, but it takes real character to understand and forgive. Chapter 2. Show sincere and honest appreciation. One of the strongest drivers of human behavior is the desire to be appreciated by others. We all like to be praised and hear that we're doing a good job. Some people even claim that all civilization is ultimately based on human desire to be appreciated by others. Our longing for approval and praise drives us to climb the highest mountains, write novels, and build billion-dollar companies. It is not necessary to give someone a fancy title to show your appreciation. Using simple phrases like "thank you" and "I'm sorry" is enough, as they are sincere and honest compliments. Don't shower people with false flattery or they will see through it. Instead, stop thinking about yourself for a moment and focus on the positive aspects of the person in front of you. Make sure to make the other person feel important. To get into the right mindset, try thinking like Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said that every person he met was superior to him in some way. So, there was always something to learn and appreciate in others. Or think about the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. So the next time you see a tired, bored, and unappreciated service employee somewhere, try brightening their day with some appreciation. Leave small sparks of gratitude. During the day, you'll be surprised to see how positively people react when their hunger for recognition is fed. Soon, you'll become someone others enjoy working with. And best of all, you'll have a positive impact on the lives of those around you. Chapter 3. Appealing to another person's interest. Assuming you like cheesecake, when you go fishing, you don't put a cheesecake at the end of your line, right? You attach what the fish wants, which is a worm. Why treat people differently? Of course, you're interested in what you want, but nobody else is. Everyone else is like you. We all are interested in what we want. The only way to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. Every person in the world knows what they want and cares about what they will get. Approach them from this perspective. Before speaking, pause and ask yourself, what can the other person get out of this? Challenge yourself even not to talk about what you want to do. Relentlessly show the people that you want to help them. The world is full of selfish people, so the rare person who selflessly serves others has a huge advantage. Andrew Carnegie had a sister-in-law whose children never returned his letters. He bet someone that he could get a response without asking for one. What he did, he wrote letters, eventually mentioning that he was enclosing a $5 bill, but omitting it. They indeed responded, thanking him for writing and asking where the money was. Part 2. 6 ways to make people like you. Chapter 1. Be genuinely interested in others. Who is universally loved for being friendly and approachable? A dog. They're always excited to see you, and you seem to be the most important thing in the world. Showing interest in other people makes them feel important. We all like people who admire us. People aren't interested in you or me. They're interested in themselves every day throughout their lives. When you see a group photo, which face do you look at first? Remember, you make friends much more easily by being interested in them than by trying to get them interested in you. Ask people about their backgrounds and goals. Remember the issues people have, and when you find a solution, share it with them. Try to talk to people who are below your level, employees, service staff, etc. For people above your level, express genuine interest in them, their work, their advice. They feel important when they can share the secrets of their success. Chapter 2. Smile. A smile says, I like you. You make me happy. I'm glad to see you. It's a message of goodwill. Once upon a time, there was a stockbroker in New York named William B. Steinhardt who decided to try something new following the author's advice. Previously, he was a notorious grump and rarely smiled in his personal or professional life. Steinhardt committed to simply smiling more, giving himself a pep talk in mirror every morning that marked the beginning of his experiment. He started the day by greeting his wife with a smile, then smiling at the doorman of his building, the subway booth attendant, the traders of the trading floor, and his colleagues at the office. What the result was, people began to return the smile. At home, Steinhardt said there was more happiness in the first 2 months of the experiment than in the entire previous year. Additionally, he found that complaints at work were easier to handle, leading to more income than before. In summary, he was a wealthier and happier man. As the story illustrates, a smile can go a long way. If someone we've just met smiles at us, we tend to automatically like them. A baby's smile, for example, immediately makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside, just like seeing a dog wagging his tail purely for the joy of seeing us. If you want to instantly make someone feel pleasant with you, show them that you're happy to see them by smiling. When they see how happy you are to meet them, they can't help but be happy to see you too. Chapter 3. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. A name is a person's identity, making them unique among all others. This is something I always ignored before, and every time I met someone new, I would hear their name and forget it after a few seconds. Later, when I needed their name, I always apologized, saying, I'm sorry, I'm very terrible with names. Could you repeat your name again? After reading the book, I realized it was a big mistake. When you remember another person's name, it shows that you truly listened and cared when they spoke. Using people's names reduce barriers and make the other person feel closer to you. Nowadays, when I meet someone, I pay close attention to the first few seconds when they mention their names. Instead of just saying, nice to meet you, I say, nice to meet you, Thomas. By repeating their name, I remember it better and it makes the other person feel connected to me. So the next time you go to the gym or to any other place, names. Instead of saying, "Hi, how are you today?" say, "Hi Thomas, how are you today?" You'll start to see the difference. Saying the name is a subtle and welcome compliment. Forgetting it or misspelling it is a crippling mistake that suggests that you didn't care enough to get it right. People pay a lot of money to have their names remembered after their death, naming buildings, having parks dedicated to their names, etc. An entrepreneur who doesn't remember the names of their important clients simply says, "I don't care about a significant part of my business." For example, Carnegie wanted to merge his company with an automobile company named Pullman. When Carnegie mentioned that the new company would still be called Pullman, Pullman became much more eager. If you have trouble remembering names, make sure to catch it when it first appears in a conversation. Ask for it to be repeated or even spell out if necessary. Then repeat it to the person several times during the conversation. Finally, when you're alone, make some kind of connection to remember it better. Chapter 4. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. A person's life is the most important thing to that person. A person's headache means more to them than a famine that kills a million people. Allowing someone to speak makes that person feel important and flattered. Everyone has gone through what they feel are tough times, and they like to talk about them if they've overcome them. Ask about this. Even better, combine this with another piece of sincere advice, gratitude, and praise. Tell them how fascinating their stories are, how you wish you had their knowledge or experience. In conversation, most people are so concerned about what they want to say next that they barely listen to the other person. Truly listening means making a conscious effort to give the other person your full attention, and the benefits of this approach are substantial. Once, the author attended to a dinner in New York where he met a botanist. As he had never met one before, the author listened to him for hours, captivated by descriptions of exotic plants and experiments. Later on, the botanist remarked to the host what an interesting conversationalist the author was, but the point is that the author hardly said anything. He had simply been a good, interested listener. Before reading the book, I never paid attention to this principle. Whenever I talked to someone, I wondered what I was doing. I always hoped the person would finish talking so I could change the subject to my areas of interest, or while the person spoke, I constantly thought about the things I would say once they finished, and when the person finished, I unloaded the information that seemed interesting to me. Chapter 5. Speak in terms of the other person's interest. Using a previous analogy, why fish with cheesecake? Fish with the hook that the other person wants. Generally, people are much more excited about topics that interest them than those that only interest you. Before meeting someone, thoroughly research their interests to have practical knowledge of the field. Identify someone's main goals and then talk about how you will help them get closer to them. For example, my goal with this YouTube channel is to reach 13,000 subscribers in the next 5 months. And to achieve that goal, if I come to you and say, "Hey, please subscribe to my channel because I have a goal to reach," you probably won't care. This means nothing to you. But if I provide you with useful information with this video, add positive value to your life, and only then ask you to subscribe and click the notification bell to benefit from my future videos, there's a good chance you will. Because if you're watching this video, I assume you're interested in your personal growth, and watching my future videos might be interesting to you. As you can see, I didn't even mention my goal. I was talking about the benefits you will get. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. Almost everyone you meet feels superior to you in some way. Let them realize in some subtle way that you acknowledge their importance. Conversely, avoid doing things that demean the other person and makes them feel small or unimportant. Praise them without wanting anything from them, simply to radiate happiness and uplift them. This principle is a kind of summary of the previous principles, so I won't spend too much time on it. Part 3. 12 ways to get people to your way of thinking. Compliments are good, but what do you do when someone disagrees with you? That's the next topic in how to win friends and influence people. In summary, set aside your instinct to fight fire with fire. People don't like to be proven wrong. They don't like admitting they need to change their minds. No matter how right or supposedly right you are, they crave importance and correcting them insults their pride. Chapter 1. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. Arguing with another person doesn't really make much sense. If you lose the argument, and if you win, the other person will resent you for hurting their pride, so you haven't really won them over. And 9 out of 10 times, the argument will only make the other person stand more firmly in their viewpoint than they were before. Therefore, the only solution is to avoid such disputes from the beginning. When you start the argument, make sure to distrust the first response that springs in you, as it is usually instinctive and defensive. And whatever you do, control your temper. Listen to what your opponent has to say without resistance or protest, and promise to carefully examine your thoughts. Try to find areas where you agree. This will help reduce your opponent's defensive attitude. Chapter 2. Start in a friendly manner. A hostile attitude only invites reciprocal hostility. People don't want to change their minds. You can't force them to agree with you, but they can be led to. Think about how to make an animal come to you. Do you chase it growling or offer food to it? A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of vinegar. Someone had a tough landlord who increased their rent. Instead of complaining that this was unfair, they talked about how much they appreciated the house and the way the landlord managed the building, and how they would like to stay another year but couldn't. Chapter 3. Show respect for the opinions of the other person. Never say you're wrong. When attacked for being wrong, people will defend their opinion to the death. They lose sight of the main point in the hope of finding small expectations where their claim is true. We form beliefs carelessly, but then develop an irrational passion to defend them when someone threatens to prove us wrong. Consider the story of how the author commissioned an interior decorator to produce some curtains for his home. Later, he was surprised by the size of the bill, and when he mentioned the price to a friend, the friend exclaimed that he had clearly been overcharged. Insulted, the author defended his actions, explaining that the high price was an indicator of quality. But then, when another friend arrived and began praising the same curtains, the author admitted that he actually felt he had overpaid and regretted the purchase. This positive approach disarmed him, and he could freely admit his mistake. You see, every time you tell someone that they are wrong, you are basically saying, "I am better than you." This is a direct attack on their self-esteem, and they will want to retaliate because you're clearly disrespecting their opinions. Chapter 4. If you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Once, the author was walking his dog, Rex, in the nearby forest. Rex liked to run freely, so he wasn't wearing a muzzle or leash. Unfortunately, they encountered a police officer who sternly told the author that this was illegal. But this time, he had let them off with a warning. The author complied, but Rex didn't like the muzzle, so very soon they returned to their old ways. That's when the same officer caught them again. This time, even before the officer could speak, the author himself expressed how very sorry he was, and how unacceptable the transgression was. Normally, the officer probably would have been angry and issued a fine, but thanks to this direct admission of guilt, he did the opposite. The officer began arguing that the little dog really wasn't hurting anyone. He accepted Carnegie's apologies and let them continue on their merry way. Admitting your mistake helps because the other person usually tries to feel important by criticizing you or your error. But at the moment you admit it, the situation changes completely. Now, to feel important, they can no longer attack you, but must show you generosity by forgiving you. This is exactly what made the police officer so lenient in the example. So the next time you realize you're wrong, admit it enthusiastically. It will produce better results, and you'll find that it's actually much more pleasant than having to defend yourself when the other person points out your mistake. Chapter 5. Let the other person do most of the talking. Someone who disagrees with you won't pay attention while you cry over your words, so encourage them to fully express their ideas. I'm sure you have seen discussions where neither of the parties were listening to the other because they felt the other side wasn't acknowledging their points. So just resist the temptation to interrupt the other person. This is costly every time you do do it. Imagine there's an empty bottle and gets filled as the other person talks. When they fill the bottle, they become much more receptive to new thoughts. Before the bottle is filled, they feel unheard. Every time you interrupt, you empty the bottle and they have to start filling it again. Chapter 6. Honestly try to see things from the other person's point of view. If you were not born in the same country as them, don't worry. If you were born in the same body as your partner, you had their experiences and saw the world through the same lens. By definition, you would come to the same conclusions. Consider the ideas and feelings of the other person as important as your own. Imagine looking out from someone else's body. Adopting this attitude is genuinely productive. It'll help you discover your person's interest, assist you in finding out your interlocutor's interest, and articulate your argument to appeal to their interests. For example, put yourself in the interviewer's shoes. Do you think they enjoy the interview process and talking to dozens of people? They also hope the next person who comes in is the right one. They too want to finish with the interviews. Change your perspective. Instead of viewing the interview as a meeting to solve your problem, see it as a meeting to solve the other party's problem. If you focus on their problems and explain how will you solve them, your problem will also be solved. Chapter 7. Be understanding. Don't worry about the ideas and desires of the other person. Anyone upset feels completely justified in their anger, no matter what you believe. Do you think that when you're angry you tell yourself, I know I'm being irrational and my anger doesn't make sense, but I'm going to be angry anyway? People crave sympathy. They want us to acknowledge everything they feel. If we can sympathize with others, they will also appreciate our side and often come closer to our way of thinking. Chapter 8. Start with questions to which the other person will answer yes. Every time someone says no, they get stuck in a defensive and consistency bias. Therefore, don't start by talking about the areas where you differ. Begin with what you agree on. Make the person say yes instead of imposing your conclusion on the other person. Guide them to that conclusion through a series of logical questions. This may sound like a trap if the person realizes the other person isn't well. It's better to do it in a genuine and patient tone rather than in a know-it-all tone. Ask challenging questions with unclear answers so it doesn't seem like you're cornering the person. Salespeople use this technique a lot. For example, imagine I want to sell you the summary of my book. I would say, you seem like a person who likes to read, right? You would say yes. Then I would proceed and say, do you like saving money? Do you like saving time? Most likely, your answers would be yes again. Once I get these yeses, I would say, then buy my book summary. It's exactly what you want. It'll save you time, money, and you'll read a book much faster. How would you feel at this point? I'm sure you would feel like I trapped you into something you don't want. Even if you liked my product, my approach would discourage you and you'd probably leave. Chapter 9. Let the other person feel that the idea is theirs. People like their own ideas more than those of the others. Presenting their own ideas makes them feel smart and important. Implementing their own ideas rather than someone else gives them a sense of control. For example, I was once negotiating with a tough person who didn't like to compromise. After a while, I noticed that reaching an agreement would be very difficult. So I decided to apply this tactic and said, do you know more about this topic than I do? You're the world expert on this, so I want to hear your opinion. How can we come to an agreement? The person paused for a moment and then started giving me advice and options. His approach shifted from being an opponent to being a mentor. After hearing all the options, I chose one and decided to implement it. Since he gave me the choice, he was much more committed and interested in successfully implementing it. Chapter 10. Appeal to the noblest motive. A person generally has two reasons for doing something. One that sounds good and another that is real. Forget the real one. Appeal to their highest moral principles. For example, when someone is breaking an agreement, say that your impression of the person's character was of high integrity. Give them some time to think about it. If they come back and want to continue, they will accept it without hesitation and admit that their character judgment was incorrect. correct, but personally they will still believe they are war people and won't break the agreement. Humans don't want to lose their noble motives we set forth. Chapter 11. Dramatize your ideas. Attention is scarcer than ever. Find ways to capture it without being artificial. Simply stating a truth is not enough. The truth has to be made vivid, interesting, and dramatic. Find a way to visually represent what is at stake. A cash register salesman observed a slow checkout line. He told the owner that he was losing cents with every customer. He threw cents on the floor to make the point. Imagine how effective this would be if he continued to do this repeatedly to illustrate the lost money. Steve Jobs presented the iPod as 1,000 songs in your pocket without mentioning gigabytes of storage. Here are some tactics on how you can apply this principle. Provide a visual analogy. Show objects by size, speed, and cost. Equate the opportunity to dollars. For example, your company is losing a Mercedes-Benz per day by not solving this problem. Personally, I like this tactic and have used it a lot in the past. For example, when I was finishing my internship, I had to do a final presentation on the results. In total, we were around 25 students. Among them, my presentation was one of the most interesting, and the reason is that when I was presenting it, I didn't talk about the boring task I did in Excel. I just started by saying that my internship saved the company $30,000. Once I said this, all the managers and the audience started listening very attentively and asked many questions at the end. To be honest, I did the same boring things as the other interns. I would say I did even less. The only difference was that I calculated the number of hours I had spent and converted it to dollars. Since it was an unpaid internship, I could easily claim that I made savings, because if a paid employee did the same job, the company had to pay the salary. Chapter 12. Issue a challenge. When motivation doesn't work, organize a competition. This makes people get moving because they don't want to be second. The desire to dominate and excel is a fundamental driver of behavior. For example, if a person is unsure, subtly question their strength. I don't blame you for being afraid. It's hard work. It will take a great person to take over the job. The final part of this book deals with how to change people without offending or arousing resentment. Chapter 1. Begin with praise and sincere appreciation. It's always easier to hear unpleasant things after hearing praise for our good points. Without praise, it sounds like we haven't done anything. This is quite common in the corporate world, where some form of praise is heard, followed by a major criticism, and finally small praises again. Instead, always try to sincerely and specifically praise specific items rather than generalities. This is even more effective when the person knows that someone is upset with the work and has come to you to complain. In this situation, if you sincerely express gratitude, it will be a pleasant surprise and make the person receptive to your feedback. Chapter 2. Draw attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Avoid direct attack. People generally know what they have done wrong. Explicitly calling attention creates resistance. Here are two tactics. First, follow sincere praise not with but with and. Perhaps you've heard that what comes after but doesn't count. Here are two examples for you to compare. First, you've done an excellent hard job, but you could have avoided these careless mistakes. Versus, you've done an excellent hard job, and if you focus on creating a checklist, your accuracy rate will improve. The later approach avoids the negative feeling of failure. Second tactic, if a task slips, do it yourself. Then show the work to the person. For example, John Wanamaker noticed that a task was slipping. He said a customer was being ignored at the sales counter while the salespeople chatted in the corner. He personally assisted the woman and then handed the purchase to the salespeople for wrapping. Chapter 3. Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Admitting your own mistakes shows that you recognize that the task is difficult and that the person's errors are understandable. Implicitly, it encourages the person to rise to your level. Carnegie says that if you want to change people's thinking, always talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Never tell them they are doing something wrong or shouldn't do it. This would only push the other person into defensive mode, and they will try to prove that they are right with all possible explanations. Instead, First, talk about your own mistakes. Tell them how you felt when you were in their place and how wrong you were. For example, I used to hire students for the internship program for a company I worked for several years ago. During the interview process, I could see that students were very intelligent, and I could see that many students really couldn't express themselves due to the stress and tension. I'm sure you're familiar with that feeling. As soon as you enter the interview room, your IQ level drops to 20, and you can't even answer simple questions. This also made my job difficult because it was challenging to identify if the student didn't know the answer or couldn't respond due to stress. Especially, the situation becomes even more challenging if the student is introverted and shy. So I always try to do the same. I try to make them feel relaxed by telling them it's just a friendly conversation and they shouldn't stress. However, it never worked. One day, I decided to start the interview process with my own embarrassing interview story when I was applying for the same position they were applying that day. I told them I couldn't answer the interview when they asked me if I could name a social media platform that is famous in that day, when Facebook was the biggest social media platform and I used it every day. Yet, I couldn't answer such a simple question. The interviewer waited for several seconds for my answer and then quietly said, Facebook. Even today, I can't understand how I couldn't answer that question. The story made the students laugh and feel at ease because they could see that I had also been in their place. And admitting my own embarrassing story helped them feel comfortable. It showed that we're all human and make mistakes in these stressful situations. Chapter 4. Ask questions instead of giving orders. Asking questions has many benefits. First, it allows the other person to arrive at their own conclusions independently. People like their own ideas more. Second, it gives control to the person and makes them feel important. Instead of following someone else's orders, the person now follows their own. Third, it stimulates creativity. Actually, better new ideas could emerge. Here are some questions you can use. Do you think this would work? What do you think of this? Can we think of different ways to do it? Chapter 5. Let the person save their dignity. People crave importance. If you strip away this importance, the person will resent it and be more difficult to influence later. Allow them to preserve their pride. The book doesn't provide clear directives on a general way to do this, but it focuses on preserving the person's pride and will and what matters to them. For example, when an employee made a mistake, she apologized for the error and said she would have the new report before the next meeting. Instead of criticizing her oversight, the manager thanked her for her work. He said it wasn't an unusual mistake for a new project. He expressed his faith in her and knew she had done her best. Chapter 6. Praise every small improvement. Praising every improvement will inspire the person to keep getting better. Again, keep in mind that persons are hungry for acknowledgement at work. Praising every improvement is an attitude as insignificant as food, and praising them a little makes them hungry for more. Personally, I believe in the power of this tactic because I've seen how it works in my own experience. It has changed me from being a shy and non-communicative person to a team leader who managed 25 people and gave presentations in front of hundreds. If you're going to apply this tactic, congratulate them specifically. Choose a specific achievement instead of general flattering comments. This makes your praise sound more sincere. I remember when I started my second job, many of my colleagues in the office warned me to be careful with one of the employees in India. They told me he's quite lazy, responds to email very late, and the quality of his work is not good. Several of my colleagues even complained to his manager, but not much changed. Once I started working with him, I could see that my colleagues were right, but instead of focusing on his mistakes, I decided to apply Carnegie's principle and focus on small positive things and genuinely praise him. So every time I saw a small good piece of work from him, I praised him for that specific task, and sometimes I copied his manager. The number of good deeds started to increase, and after 7 weeks, he was a completely different person. He became very proactive and friendly in his communications, and it wasn't just towards me but also towards others. He even added me as a friend on Facebook, which had never happened with any of my colleagues before. Chapter 7. Give the person a fine reputation to live up to. If you want to improve something about a person, act as if that trait is already one of their outstanding characteristics. For example, let's say when you're chatting with your friends, one of them says they know you as someone who keeps a good secret and can be trusted. The rest of your friends also agree with this opinion. After hearing this, even if you're not someone who can keep a good secret, you'll start acting like one. You'll be very careful not to lose this status. You'll always speak carefully not to reveal someone's secret and lose your valuable title. Chapter 8. Make the fault seem easy to correct. If you tell someone they lack talent and will never be good at something, you have eliminated interest and hope for improvement. Instead, tell them they have the talent and the right fundamentals but just need practice to improve. Make the steps easy to take. For example, a dance instructor for a poor dancer might say, "You have a natural sense of rhythm. You're a born dancer." Chapter 9. Make the person happy about doing the things you suggest. This principle is similar to one of the earlier principles that involved considering the person's interest. Personally, I believe that talking only about the other person's interest can raise suspicions. For example, if someone is only talking about your interests without theirs, they might suspect that not everything is being revealed. One way to avoid sounding unsincere is to acknowledge why you want the action up front and then talk about the benefits both of you enjoy. If you like this video, don't forget to share it with someone you think could benefit from this information. And remember, with reading and education, life is always so much better.